the photograph that shouldn't exist. The night we found the camera. Before I begin this story, there is one important thing I should mention. Even today, years later, none of us can explain what we saw in that photograph. We tried to find logical answers. We checked the camera. We checked the location. We even went back to the house a second time. But the truth is, nothing ever made sense. Because the photograph showed something that should not have been there. Something that none of us saw that night. Yet it was standing behind us. Watching. This incident happened in 2017, when I was in my second year of college. Back then, I had a small group of close friends. We spent most weekends together doing something a little unusual. Instead of going to parties or crowded places, we preferred exploring old abandoned locations. Not because we believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. Mostly it was curiosity. Old buildings often have interesting stories, and we liked documenting those places with photos and videos. There were 4 of us in the group. Me, my friend Rahim, who usually drove us everywhere. Farhan, who always carried a camera and liked filming everything. And Junaid, who mostly came along for the adventure. Most of the time, our trips were uneventful. Old factories, empty schools, abandoned houses. Nothing truly strange ever happened. Until the night we visited the farmhouse. The story we heard. The farmhouse was located outside the city, near a small rural village. Rahim had heard about it from one of his relatives. According to the villagers, the house had been empty for nearly 20 years. People rarely went near it anymore. Some claimed strange lights had been seen in the windows late at night. Others said they sometimes heard footsteps inside the house, even though nobody lived there. Of course, stories like that tend to grow over time. We assumed it was just local folklore. But the place sounded interesting enough to explore. So one Friday evening, we decided to visit it. The drive. We left the city around 10:30 p.m. The drive took about 40 minutes. At first, the road was busy with traffic and streetlights. But the farther we went, the quieter everything became. Eventually, there were no streetlights at all. Only darkness. The road became narrow and surrounded by fields. Our car headlights were the only source of light. None of us said it out loud, but the atmosphere felt different out there. Quieter than usual. Even the air felt still. Finally, Rahim slowed the car and pointed ahead. "That should be it," he said. And there it was. The farmhouse. The farmhouse stood alone in the middle of a large open field. The building looked older than we expected. Most of the windows were broken. Part of the roof had collapsed. Tall grass surrounded the entire structure. From a distance, it looked almost like a silhouette against the night sky. Farhan immediately turned on his camera. He liked recording everything whenever we explored places like this. "All right," he said jokingly. "Let's see if this place is as haunted as people say." We laughed. At that moment, none of us felt scared. To us, it was just another abandoned building. Entering the house, we walked across the field toward the house. The ground was uneven, covered with weeds. The front door of the farmhouse was missing completely. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old wood. Moonlight came through the broken windows, lighting parts of the hallway. The floor creaked slightly when we stepped inside. But that was normal for an old building. We began exploring room by room. Most of the furniture had been removed years ago. Only a few broken chairs and wooden shelves remained. Old photographs were still hanging on some of the walls. The entire place felt frozen in time. Something felt different. After about 10 minutes of exploring the ground floor, we noticed a staircase leading upstairs. Rahim pointed his flashlight toward it. "Let's check the second floor," he said. The staircase looked fragile, but it held our weight. When we reached the top, we found a narrow hallway with 3 doors. 2 bedrooms on the left. 1 room at the far end. The first room was empty. The second room had nothing but broken wooden boards on the floor. But the third room was different. The moment we opened that door, we all stopped. Because right in the center of the room, there was a single chair, facing the doorway. And sitting on that chair was an old camera. The camera looked like it belonged to another era. An old film camera. Metal body. Slightly worn edges. But what was strange was this. Everything else in the room was covered in dust. The floor, the walls, the window frame. But the camera looked perfectly clean. Rahim carefully picked it up. "Maybe someone left it here recently," he said. But Farhan shook his head. "If someone came here recently, there would be footprints." We looked down at the floor. There were only our footprints in the dust. Nothing else. Farhan examined the camera more closely. "There's still film inside," he said. That immediately caught our attention. Film cameras only hold a limited number of photos, which meant someone had used it recently. But we had seen no one near the house. Taking the camera, Farhan decided we should take the camera with us. Not to keep it, but to develop the film and see what photos were inside. Maybe it belonged to someone who had explored the house before us. So he placed the camera carefully inside his backpack. We stayed in the house for another 15 minutes. Then we left. Nothing strange happened while we were inside. No unusual sounds. No shadows. No footsteps. Just silence. At least that's what we thought. The photograph. The next afternoon, we took the film to a small photography shop. We were curious to see the pictures. About 30 minutes later, the shop owner handed us a small stack of printed photographs. We sat down and started going through them. The first few pictures showed the farmhouse from outside. Then pictures of the hallway. Pictures of the upstairs rooms. It looked like someone had explored the house before us. But then we reached the last photograph. And the moment we saw it, the room went completely silent. Because the photo showed the 4 of us standing in the upstairs hallway. Exactly where we had been the night before. But none of us remembered taking that photo. And behind us, standing in the doorway of the 3rd room, was someone else. A tall, shadowy figure. Watching us. The shadow in the photograph. For several seconds after seeing that photograph, none of us said anything. We just stared at it. At first we thought maybe it was a trick of the light. Sometimes old cameras produce strange shadows or distortions. But the longer we looked at the photo, the more obvious it became. The shape behind us wasn't just a shadow. It had a clear outline. A tall figure, standing in the doorway, watching us, trying to explain it. Rahim was the first one to speak. "That's probably just someone else who was there," he said. "But we didn't notice them." It sounded like a reasonable explanation. Maybe someone had entered the house while we were upstairs, and we simply didn't hear them. But that explanation had a problem. If someone had been standing behind us, why didn't we see them when we left the house? The hallway had been completely empty. Farhan looked closely at the photo again. "Wait," he said quietly. "Look at the doorway." We leaned closer. The figure wasn't standing inside the room. It was standing slightly behind the doorframe, almost like it was hiding. or watching us without wanting to be noticed. The timestamp. Then Farhan noticed something else. The camera had automatically printed the time and date on the bottom corner of the photograph. We all looked at it carefully. The time read 11:42 p.m. That was strange, because according to our phones, we had already left the house by 11:35 p.m., which meant the photograph had been taken after we were gone. But that made no sense. We had the camera with us. Farhan had taken it from the chair and placed it inside his backpack. It had never left his bag after that. So how could the camera take a photograph while it was inside the backpack? None of us had an answer. The shop owner. The photography shop owner noticed we were staring at the picture for a long time. He walked over and looked at it. "Interesting photo," he said casually. "Who took it?" We explained that we had found the camera in an abandoned house. He studied the picture again. Then he said something that made the situation even stranger. "This camera is old," he said. "Probably from the early 1990s. That wasn't surprising. But then he added something else. "These cameras don't have automatic timers." We looked at him. "What do you mean?" Rahim asked. The shop owner shrugged. "I mean it can't take pictures by itself. You have to press the shutter button." Silence in the car. On the drive back from the shop, the mood in the car was completely different from the night before. None of us were laughing anymore. Farhan kept looking at the photograph. Rahim was unusually quiet. Junaid finally broke the silence. "Maybe someone was hiding in the house," he said. "And they took the picture after we left." That was the most logical explanation we had heard so far. But it still left a few questions unanswered. How did that person get the camera back inside Farhan's bag? And why would they take a photo of us instead of revealing themselves? Looking at the photo again. Later that evening, we met again at Rahim's apartment. We placed the photograph on the table and looked at it carefully under better lighting. The details were clearer now. The figure behind us looked tall, much taller than any of us. Its head almost touched the top of the doorway. But what stood out the most was the face. Or rather, the lack of one. The face looked completely dark, like the light hadn't reached it. But the rest of the hallway was clearly visible, which meant the lighting should have illuminated the figure's face too. Yet it didn't. It was just a dark shape, standing there, something we didn't notice. While examining the photograph, Farhan suddenly noticed another detail. "Look at Junaid," he said. We all turned our attention to Junaid in the picture. He was standing closest to the doorway, and his head was slightly turned, almost like he had noticed something behind him. But in reality, Junaid didn't remember turning around at all. "I never saw anyone there," he said. "But the way I'm standing, it looks like I sense something." That made the entire situation even more unsettling. Because if someone had been standing that close to us, we should have noticed. The decision. Eventually, Rahim leaned back in his chair. "There's only one way to figure this out," he said. We all looked at him. "We go back to the farmhouse." Junaid immediately shook his head. "Why would we go back there?" Rahim pointed at the photograph. "Because something about this picture doesn't make sense. And I want to know why." For a moment, no one spoke. Going back to the farmhouse suddenly didn't feel like a fun adventure anymore. But curiosity can be a powerful thing. And after a few minutes, we all agreed we would return to the farmhouse. The next night. Later that evening, I went home and placed the photograph on my desk. I kept staring at it, trying to convince myself there was a simple explanation. Eventually, I went to bed. But sometime around 2:30 a.m. I woke up suddenly. At first, I didn't know why. Then I noticed something strange. My bedroom door was slightly open. I was certain I had closed it before going to sleep. I sat up and looked toward the hallway. Everything was dark. But for a brief moment, I thought I saw something standing near the door, watching me. The first night something followed us. The moment I thought I saw something near my bedroom door, I sat up immediately. My eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. The hallway outside my room was quiet. Nothing moved. For a few seconds I told myself it was probably just my imagination. Sometimes when you wake up suddenly in the middle of the night, your mind plays tricks on you. Still, something felt wrong. I clearly remembered closing my bedroom door before going to sleep. But now it was slightly open, just enough to see a thin line of darkness in the hallway. I got out of bed and walked toward the door. The floor creaked softly under my steps. When I opened the door fully and looked down the hallway, there was no one there. Everything looked normal. The living room lights were off. The windows were closed. Nothing seemed out of place. After checking the apartment, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe I had simply forgotten to close the door. Eventually, I went back to bed. But that night's sleep came slowly. The next morning, the next day I met Rahim, Farhan, and Junaid again. We were supposed to decide whether we would actually return to the farmhouse that night. When I arrived at Rahim's apartment, I noticed something unusual about Farhan. He looked tired, more tired than usual. "Did you sleep last night?" Rahim asked him. Farhan shook his head. "Not really," he said. "Something strange happened. That immediately caught our attention." Farhan explained that around 3 a.m., he had woken up because he heard a sound in his apartment. A soft sound, like someone moving slowly in the hallway. At first he assumed it was one of his neighbors. But the sound didn't go away. Instead, it moved closer to his bedroom door. He said he could hear footsteps stopping right outside his room. Then he heard something else. A light tapping sound. 3 taps. On the door. Tap, tap, tap. Farhan stayed completely still in bed. He didn't open the door. Eventually the sound stopped. But when he finally got up in the morning and checked the hallway, his apartment door had been unlocked, even though he clearly remembered locking it before going to sleep. A strange pattern. When Farhan finished telling the story, Junaid looked uncomfortable. "Something similar happened to me," he said quietly. Rahim and I turned toward him. Junaid explained that around 2:45 a.m. he had woken up suddenly. Not because of a noise, but because he felt like someone was watching him. He said he opened his eyes and looked toward the corner of his room. And for a brief moment, he thought he saw a tall shadow near the wall. But when he turned on the light, nothing was there. At first he assumed he had imagined it. But then he noticed something strange. The window in his room was slightly open, even though he always kept it closed at night. The photo again. We placed the photograph on the table again. None of us spoke for a moment. 3 of us had experienced something unusual during the same night. That might have been coincidence, but the timing felt strange. Rahim finally broke the silence. "Maybe we're overthinking this," he said. "Sometimes when you see something unsettling, your mind becomes more alert. That can make normal things seem unusual." It sounded like a logical explanation. And honestly, we all wanted to believe that was the case. But Farhan was still staring at the photograph. "There's something else I noticed," he said. We looked at him. He pointed at the figure behind us in the photo. Look at the position of its head. At first, we didn't see anything unusual. Then Farhan zoomed in using his phone camera. And suddenly, we understood what he meant. The figure's head wasn't facing the camera. It was slightly tilted, almost like it was looking at Junaid, not at the person taking the photograph. Going back. After a long discussion, Rahim made the final decision. "We're going back tonight," he said. "If someone has been staying in that house, we'll find out. If not, then at least we'll know we tried to solve the mystery." Junaid looked hesitant, but eventually he agreed. Curiosity had already taken hold of all of us. And the photograph was still sitting on the table, like a reminder that something about that night didn't make sense. The return. That evening we left the city again. The drive felt different this time. No one was joking. No one was playing music. The road seemed darker than the night before. After about 40 minutes, Rahim slowed the car. The farmhouse appeared in the distance, exactly the same as before, standing alone in the field. Silent. Waiting. But as we stepped out of the car, Farhan said something that made all of us stop. "Do you guys see that?" We followed his gaze toward the second-floor window of the farmhouse. For a brief moment, we thought we saw something move behind the broken glass.